On the morning of October 15th, 1993, Margaret Sullivan opened the bedroom door, expecting to wake her 7-year-old twin daughters for school. Instead, she found 2 empty beds, a window cracked open just enough for the autumn breeze to flutter the pink curtains, and a silence so profound it would haunt her for the next 31 years. Emma and Grace Sullivan had vanished without a trace from their second-floor bedroom in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. No screams, no signs of struggle, no ransom note, just 2 little girls who had kissed their parents goodnight and disappeared into the October darkness like morning mist. The story begins 3 decades earlier, in a town where everyone knew everyone, where doors remained unlocked, and where the most exciting crime was usually teenagers toilet papering the high school football field. Millbrook, population 347, nestled in the rolling hills of central Pennsylvania, was the kind of place where parents let their children ride bikes until streetlights came on, where the local diner served as the unofficial town hall, and where a mystery like this simply didn't happen. But it did happen, and it would consume not just the Sullivan family, but an entire community for generations. The Sullivan house sat on Maple Street, a tree-lined avenue where colonial-style homes displayed Halloween decorations and carved pumpkins. Robert Sullivan, an insurance adjuster for the regional office, had purchased the 2-story blue house with white shutters in 1985, the year he married Margaret, an elementary school teacher at Millbrook Primary. They had planned for children, dreamed of family barbecues in the backyard, Christmas mornings around the fireplace, and graduations they would attend with tears of pride. When the twins were born in 1986, their dreams seemed complete. Emma and Grace were identical in every way except personality. Emma, born 12 minutes before her sister, possessed an adventurous spirit that often led her to climb trees, explore creek beds, and convince Grace to join her escapades. Grace, quieter and more cautious, preferred books and drawing, though she would always follow her sister's lead with unwavering loyalty. They were like 2 halves of one person, Margaret would later tell investigators. Emma was the courage, Grace was the conscience. You never saw one without the other. The twins shared a bedroom decorated in their favorite colors, pink and lavender. Margaret had spent weeks that summer painting clouds on the ceiling and installing glow-in-the-dark stars that formed constellations Emma had learned about in their children's astronomy book. 2 twin beds sat parallel to each other, separated by a small nightstand that held a lamp shaped like a fairy tale castle. Along the far wall stood a large oak wardrobe that Robert's grandfather had built in 1943, a family heirloom with intricate carvings and brass handles that had developed a green patina over the decades. The closet, as the family called the wardrobe, had always been a source of fascination for the twins. Its deep interior could hold not just their clothes, but also served as a reading nook when Grace wanted to escape with a book, or a fortress when Emma declared war on imaginary pirates. Margaret often found them both squeezed inside, whispering secrets or playing elaborate games of make-believe. On the evening of October 14th, 1993, everything seemed perfectly normal. Robert had returned from work at his usual time, 6:15 p.m., tired but looking forward to the weekend. Margaret had prepared the twins' favorite dinner, spaghetti with meatballs, green beans, and chocolate milk. The family ate together at the kitchen table, discussing the school's upcoming Halloween parade and the twins' costume plans. "We want to be matching witches," Emma announced, twirling spaghetti around her fork with more enthusiasm than skill. "But good witches," Grace clarified, always mindful of not frightening anyone, "with sparkly hats and pretty dresses." After dinner, the family watched an episode of Full House in the living room, the twins curled up on either side of their parents on the comfortable brown sofa. Bath time followed, with the usual splashing and giggling that echoed through the house. Margaret read them 2 chapters from Charlotte's Web, a nightly ritual that had begun when they turned 6. "Will you leave the hallway light on?" Grace asked, as Margaret tucked the covers under her chin. "Of course, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." "Mom!" Emma called as Margaret reached the doorway. "Yes, baby? Can we have pancakes tomorrow? It's Saturday." "We'll see. Now close your eyes and get some sleep." Margaret kissed both girls goodnight, leaving their bedroom door slightly ajar and the hallway light glowing softly. She and Robert spent the evening reading in the living room, she with a romance novel, he with insurance policy documents, before heading to bed around 10:30 p.m. The house settled into its familiar nighttime rhythm. The old furnace cycled on and off with gentle rumbling sounds. Tree branches occasionally brushed against the windows when the wind picked up. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, then 1 o'clock, then 2, marking the passage of time in a house where 7 people slept peacefully. Or so everyone believed. At 7 a.m. sharp, Margaret's alarm clock delivered its usual weekend wake-up call. Saturday mornings were special in the Sullivan household. No rushing to get ready for school, no packed lunches to prepare, no homework to check. Just leisurely breakfast, family time, and whatever adventures the day might bring. Margaret slipped on her robe and padding down the hallway to wake the twins. She knocked gently on their partially open door before pushing it wider. "Good morning, sleepyheads." Time to get up for those pancakes Emma wanted. But the cheerful greeting died in her throat. Both beds were empty, covers thrown back as if the girls had gotten up quickly. The window, which Margaret distinctly remembered checking before bedtime to ensure it was locked, stood slightly open. Cool autumn air drifted through the gap, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and morning frost. "Girls!" Margaret called, thinking perhaps they had gone to the bathroom or wandered downstairs for early morning cartoons. "Emma? Grace?" No response. She checked the bathroom across the hall. Empty. She hurried downstairs, calling their names with increasing urgency. The living room, kitchen, basement, even the garage, all empty. Robert, awakened by her increasingly frantic voice, joined the search. "Maybe they went outside," he suggested, though both parents knew the twins had never left the house without permission, especially not in their nightgowns and bare feet. They searched the backyard, the front yard, the neighbor's property, calling out names that the morning wind seemed to swallow. Mrs. Henderson from next door emerged from her house in her bathrobe, concerned by the commotion. "I haven't seen them," she said, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation, "but I'll help you look." Within minutes, the search expanded as neighbors joined the effort. The Kowalskis from across the street checked their shed and garage. Mr. Peterson, who lived 3 houses down, organized a systematic search of the entire neighborhood. By 9 a.m., when it became clear the twins were not hiding somewhere nearby, Robert made the call that would change their lives forever. 911, what's your emergency? "My daughters are missing, twin 7-year-old girls. They were in their bedroom last night, and this morning they're gone." Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the Sullivan house at 9:47 a.m., followed closely by 2 patrol officers and a crime scene investigator. Detective Chen, 32 years old with 6 years of experience in the Pennsylvania State Police, had handled missing children cases before, though most involved custody disputes or teenagers who had run away. 2 7-year-olds vanishing from a locked house presented a different challenge entirely. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to walk me through yesterday evening, starting with dinner," Detective Chen said, settling into the living room chair while officers began processing the twins' bedroom. "Every detail you can remember, no matter how small it might seem." Margaret recounted the evening with painful precision: the spaghetti dinner, the television show, bath time, bedtime story, final goodnight kisses. Robert confirmed every detail, adding his own observations about checking the front and back doors before bed, a nightly routine he had followed for years. The bedroom window, Detective Chen noted. You're certain it was closed and locked last night? I checked it myself, Margaret insisted. I always do. The girls sometimes open it during the day, but I make sure it's secure before bedtime, especially when the weather's getting colder. Could they have opened it from inside? Robert shook his head. It's old and sticks badly. Margaret and I can barely get it open when we try. There's no way the twins could have managed it, especially not quietly. Detective Chen made detailed notes while crime scene investigator Tom Bradley processed the bedroom. Bradley, a meticulous professional with 15 years of experience, photographed everything: the unmade beds, the open window, the children's clothes laid out for the next day, the toys scattered on the floor. No signs of struggle, Bradley reported. No displaced furniture, no torn clothing, nothing to suggest they resisted or were forced to leave. What about the window? Detective Chen asked. No fingerprints on the glass or frame except what you'd expect from the family. No scratches or marks suggesting forced entry. If someone came through this window, they were very careful about it. Or, Detective Chen said quietly, they went out through it. The thought that 7-year-old twins could have climbed out a second-story window in the middle of the night seemed impossible, but Detective Chen had learned never to dismiss any possibility until evidence ruled it out. The search expanded throughout the morning. Millbrook's volunteer fire department organized search parties that combed through the woods behind the Sullivan house, the abandoned Miller farm on the outskirts of town, and the creek that ran through the center of Millbrook. Local businesses closed as owners joined the effort. The high school football team, scheduled for morning practice, instead spread out across town, looking in every garage, shed, and hiding spot they could imagine. By noon, the story had reached regional news outlets. Television crews from Harrisburg and Philadelphia began arriving in Millbrook, transforming the quiet town into a media circus. Reporters interviewed neighbors, school officials, and anyone willing to speak about the Sullivan family and the missing twins. They were such good girls, said Mrs. Patterson, the twins' second-grade teacher. Never any trouble, always together, always looking out for each other. This just doesn't make sense. The Pennsylvania State Police established a command center in the Millbrook Community Center, installing additional phone lines to handle the flood of tips that began pouring in. Every reported sighting, every suspicious person, every possible lead received immediate attention from investigators. But as the hours passed, hope began to fade. Professional search and rescue teams arrived with specially trained dogs, but the scent trails ended abruptly at the twins' bedroom window. Helicopter searches revealed no trace of the girls. Door-to-door interviews throughout Millbrook and surrounding communities produced no useful information. Someone has to know something, Margaret insisted during a tearful press conference that evening. 7-year-old children don't just disappear. Please, if you know anything at all, call the police. We just want our babies home. The FBI joined the investigation on October 17th, bringing additional resources and expertise in child abduction cases. Special Agent Michael Rodriguez, a specialist in crimes against children, established a federal task force that would eventually involve over 50 investigators from multiple agencies. We're exploring every possibility, Agent Rodriguez announced at a press briefing. Family abduction, stranger abduction, the possibility that the children left voluntarily and became lost. We will not rest until we find Emma and Grace Sullivan. But the investigation faced immediate challenges. Millbrook's small-town atmosphere meant few security cameras, limited surveillance footage, and long stretches of rural roads where someone could travel undetected. The timing of the disappearance, sometime between midnight and 7 a.m., meant most potential witnesses were asleep. Investigators interviewed everyone who had contact with the twins in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Teachers, classmates, family friends, distant relatives, delivery personnel, repair workers. Anyone who might have shown unusual interest in the children or had access to information about the family's routines. Robert and Margaret submitted to polygraph tests, psychological evaluations, and exhaustive interviews about their marriage, finances, and relationships. Both parents passed every examination, their grief and desperation clearly genuine. Extended family members underwent similar scrutiny, all with the same result: no indication of family involvement in the twins' disappearance. The investigation explored increasingly desperate theories. Had the twins been kidnapped by someone planning to sell them? Were they taken by a person or persons unknown for unthinkable purposes? Could they have witnessed something that made them targets? Each theory led to dead ends and mounting frustration. Local residents organized around-the-clock search efforts that continued for weeks. Margaret's sister Jennifer flew in from California to coordinate volunteers and manage the flood of donations that arrived from across the country. Robert took extended leave from his job, spending every waking hour either searching for his daughters or working with investigators. The twins' bedroom became a shrine. Margaret refused to let anyone change anything, insisting that when Emma and Grace returned, everything would be exactly as they left it. The beds remained unmade, the clothes laid out for a Saturday morning that never came, the children's books still stacked on the nightstand. Halloween came and went without celebration. The costumes Margaret had been sewing, matching witch outfits with sparkly hats and pretty dresses, hung unfinished in her sewing room. Thanksgiving passed in somber silence. Christmas decorations stayed packed away in the attic. As 1993 became 1994, the massive search effort gradually scaled back. Federal agents returned to other cases. Television reporters moved on to new stories. Search volunteers resumed their normal lives, though many continued to look for any sign of the twins during their daily routines. Detective Chen, however, refused to give up. The Sullivan case became her obsession, the file that followed her home every night. She continued interviewing witnesses, re-examining evidence, exploring new leads, no matter how unlikely they seemed. "These children didn't vanish into thin air," she told her supervisor. "Somebody knows what happened to them. Somebody saw something, heard something, or knows something they haven't realized is important." But months passed without breakthroughs. The investigation that had begun with such urgency and hope slowly transformed into a cold case, filed away with hundreds of other unsolved mysteries that haunted law enforcement agencies across the country. Margaret and Robert struggled to rebuild their shattered lives. Margaret returned to teaching, finding some comfort in working with children the same age as her missing daughters. Robert went back to his insurance job, but found it difficult to concentrate on policy claims and premium calculations when his own life felt like an unsolved puzzle. Their marriage, strong before the tragedy, showed signs of strain under the enormous pressure of living with uncertainty. Some nights they held each other and cried. Other nights they argued about decisions they had made, signs they might have missed, different ways they could have protected their children. "We can't keep living like this," Robert said one evening in early 1995, nearly 18 months after the disappearance. "We have to find a way to move forward." "Move forward?" Margaret's voice rose with anguish. "They're our children. We don't move forward. We keep looking. We keep hoping. We keep believing they're coming home." And the argument that followed was their worst, filled with accusations, grief, and the terrible weight of parental guilt. But ultimately, they recognized that destroying their marriage would not bring their daughters back. If Emma and Grace ever returned, they needed to find their parents still together, still a family. Years passed. The twins would have turned 8, then 9, then 10. Margaret calculated their growth, imagined how they might look, wondered what interests they would have developed. She kept their bedroom exactly as it was, changing only to occasionally dust the furniture and vacuum the carpet. The investigation officially went cold in 1998, though Detective Chen, by then promoted to sergeant, continued following up on periodic tips and reported sightings. Every few months someone would call claiming to have seen twins who matched Emma and Grace's description. Each lead required investigation. Each lead led nowhere. The Sullivan case became part of Millbrook's identity. New residents learned about it when they moved to town. Children grew up hearing the story of the twins who disappeared. Local historians included it in books about the town's past. The case was featured on television programs about unsolved mysteries, generating new tips that invariably proved fruitless. Margaret and Robert aged visibly, their hair going grey, their faces bearing the weight of perpetual sorrow. They attended support groups for families of missing children, finding some comfort in sharing their experience with others who understood their unique form of grief. "You learn to live with the not knowing," Margaret told a new member of their support group in 2003, 10 years after the disappearance. "You never stop hoping, never stop believing they might come home tomorrow, but you also have to find a way to live today, because that's what they would want for you." The twins' case remained open, technically speaking, though it received little active attention from law enforcement. Detective Chen had retired in 2008, passing the file to her successor with instructions to follow up on any significant leads. But significant leads had stopped coming years earlier. By 2015, Emma and Grace would have been 29 years old, perhaps married with children of their own. Margaret, now 63 and retired from teaching, sometimes walked through town, imagining she might see young women who looked familiar, who carried themselves with Emma's confidence or Grace's gentleness. The bedroom shrine remained unchanged. Robert had suggested several times that they might convert it to a home office or craft room, but Margaret couldn't bear the thought of disturbing anything. The glow-in-the-dark stars still decorated the ceiling. The fairy tale lamp still sat on the nightstand. The old oak wardrobe still dominated the far wall, its brass handles now completely green with age. As 2020 approached, the case had been cold for over 2 decades. Most of the original investigators had retired or moved on to other departments. The FBI file gathered dust in a storage facility. The media attention had long since faded. Millbrook had grown and changed. New families moving in who knew nothing about the Sullivan twins. But Margaret never gave up hope. Every morning when she woke up, part of her still expected to hear familiar voices calling from the bedroom down the hall. Every knock at the door made her heart race with the possibility that someone had finally found her daughters. Every phone call carried the potential for the news she had been waiting 31 years to hear. She could never have imagined that the answer to the mystery that had consumed her life was waiting just a few feet away, in the old oak wardrobe where her daughters used to play and whisper secrets. The closet that would soon be found breathing. The call came on a rainy Thursday morning in March 2024, 31 years after the twins disappeared. Margaret Sullivan, now 72 and moving more slowly than she once did, was having her morning coffee when the phone rang with news that would change everything. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Detective James Morrison with the Pennsylvania State Police. I'm calling about your daughter's case." Margaret's hand trembled as she set down her coffee cup. Over the decades, she had received countless such calls. Reported sightings, new leads, false alarms that lifted her hopes only to dash them again. But something in Detective Morrison's voice sounded different. "We'd like to meet with you and your husband today, if possible. There's been a development." Robert, now 75 and battling early-stage arthritis, had been reading the morning paper in his favorite chair. He looked up when he heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath, immediately recognizing the expression that had crossed her face hundreds of times before. Hope mixed with terror. The possibility that their long nightmare might finally be ending. Detective Morrison arrived at 2:00 p.m., accompanied by FBI Special Agent Lisa Chen. the daughter of the now-retired detective Sarah Chen, who had led the original investigation. The younger Chen had grown up hearing about the Sullivan case and had requested assignment to the cold case unit, partly because of its personal significance to her family. "Before we begin," Detective Morrison said, as they settled in the same living room where the first interviews had taken place 3 decades earlier, "I want you to understand that what we're going to discuss may be difficult to hear." Margaret reached for Robert's hand. After 31 years of waiting, she had prepared herself for any possibility. Confirmation of death, evidence of kidnapping, even the incomprehensible notion that her daughters had somehow chosen to disappear. But she was not prepared for what Detective Morrison was about to reveal. "Mrs. Sullivan, we need to ask you about the old wardrobe in the twins' bedroom, the one you've kept exactly as it was since 1993. The closet?" Margaret's confusion was evident. "What about it? Has anyone ever opened it, looked inside it, moved it?" "Of course we looked inside it," Robert said. "The night they disappeared, we searched everywhere. The police searched everywhere. The FBI searched everywhere." Agent Chen consulted her notes. According to the 1993 investigation reports, the wardrobe was searched on October 15th and found to contain only children's clothing and toys. "Is that your recollection?" "Yes," Margaret confirmed. "Emma and Grace kept their dress-up clothes in there, some books, their treasures, little girl things." Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with Agent Chen. "Mrs. Sullivan, when was the last time you actually opened the wardrobe? Physically opened the doors and looked inside?" Margaret thought carefully. "I dust it regularly, but open it? I don't know. Maybe 2010, 2012. There was no reason to. I keep their everyday clothes in the dresser and the special things in the wardrobe. I just never wanted to disturb them. We'd like your permission to examine the wardrobe again," Agent Chen said gently, "with modern technology and techniques that weren't available in 1993. "Why?" Robert's voice carried a mixture of hope and dread. "What do you think you'll find?" "We're not certain," Detective Morrison admitted, "but we've received information that suggests we may have missed something important during the original investigation." The information Detective Morrison referenced had come from an unexpected source: David Bradley, the now retired crime scene investigator who had processed the twins' bedroom in 1993. Bradley, 73 and suffering from late-stage Alzheimer's disease, had been living in a memory care facility for the past 2 years. During a lucid moment the previous week, Bradley had become agitated while talking to his daughter about old cases. He insisted there was something wrong with his investigation of the Sullivan twins' disappearance, something he had missed or forgotten to document. "The closet," he had told his daughter repeatedly. There was something about the closet, something that didn't make sense. Bradley's daughter had initially dismissed her father's concerns as confusion related to his condition. But when he continued to bring up the Sullivan case over several days, describing details that seemed too specific and accurate to be delusions, she decided to contact the Pennsylvania State Police. Detective Morrison had visited Bradley at the memory care facility, finding the elderly investigator in one of his increasingly rare periods of clarity. What Bradley told him was troubling enough to warrant reopening active investigation into the case. "I measured that bedroom," Bradley had insisted. "I measured everything. The room is 12 feet by 14 feet. But when I added up all the furniture dimensions, the math didn't work. There was space missing. Space that should have been there but wasn't." Bradley's original notes from 1993, retrieved from storage, contained detailed measurements of the twins' bedroom and all its contents. Detective Morrison had a forensic architect review the measurements, and the analysis confirmed Bradley's concerns. The wardrobe appeared to extend further into the room than the wall behind it should have allowed. "It's possible the wardrobe was built with a false back," the architect had explained. Or there could be some kind of hidden compartment. In 1993, investigators might not have thought to look for such things, especially in a child's bedroom. Now, sitting in the Sullivan living room, Detective Morrison and Agent Chen were requesting permission to conduct a more thorough examination of the piece of furniture that had been present during the twins' disappearance, but never fully investigated. "You think they might be inside it?" Margaret whispered, voicing the horrific possibility that had been haunting her since the phone call. "We don't know what we'll find," Agent Chen said honestly. "But we owe it to your family and to Emma and Grace to examine every possibility we may have overlooked." Margaret and Robert agreed immediately. Within hours, a new crime scene team had assembled at the house on Maple Street. News of the renewed investigation spread quickly through Millbrook, and by evening, neighbors and reporters had gathered outside the Sullivan home, just as they had 31 years earlier. The twins' bedroom looked exactly as it had in 1993, preserved like a museum exhibit of childhood interrupted. The beds remained unmade, the clothes still laid out for a Saturday morning that never came. The glow-in-the-dark stars Margaret had so carefully arranged still decorated the ceiling, though their luminescence had long since faded. The old oak wardrobe dominated the far wall, its brass handles now completely green with patina. Crime scene investigator Sarah Martinez, Bradley's successor, approached the piece with modern equipment that hadn't existed during the original investigation. "Before we open it," Martinez said, "I want to take some measurements and use ground-penetrating radar to see what we're dealing with." The radar revealed what Bradley's instincts had suggested decades earlier. The wardrobe was significantly deeper than the wall behind it should have allowed. More troubling, the radar detected what appeared to be a hollow space behind the back panel of the wardrobe. "There's definitely something back there," Martinez reported. "A cavity of some kind. Could be architectural, could be intentional." Margaret and Robert waited downstairs while the investigation continued. The hours passed slowly, marked by the sounds of careful work above, furniture being moved, equipment being set up, quiet conversations between investigators. At 11:47 p.m., Detective Morrison came downstairs with an expression that Margaret had learned to read over 31 years of disappointment. But this time, something was different. "We found something," he said simply. Margaret's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. Robert moved to her side, his own face pale with anticipation. "What?" Margaret managed to whisper. "Behind the wardrobe there's a hidden space. A room, actually. We haven't been inside yet. We want to be extremely careful about preserving any evidence, but Mrs. Sullivan—" Detective Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are clear signs that someone has been living in that space." "Living in it?" Robert's voice cracked. "Recently?" "We're not sure about the timeline yet, but there's bedding, food containers, personal items. The space appears to have been accessed regularly." Agent Chen joined them, carrying a small evidence bag. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need to ask you to look at something. Can you tell me if you recognize this?" Inside the bag was a small, tarnished silver locket in the shape of a heart. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized it immediately. "That's Grace's locket. I gave it to her for her 7th birthday, just 2 weeks before. My mother gave it to me when I was her age." "It was found just inside the hidden space," Agent Chen explained. "Along with this." The second evidence bag contained a child's drawing, faded but still recognizable. 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow with Emma and Grace written in a child's uncertain handwriting at the bottom. Margaret began to sob, 31 years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. Robert held her as she cried, his own tears falling silently onto her grey hair. "Are they—" Robert couldn't finish the question. "We don't know," Detective Morrison said honestly. The space is more complex than we initially thought. It appears to connect to other parts of the house through a series of passages built into the walls. We're going to need several days to fully explore and document everything." "But they could still be alive?" Margaret asked through her tears. "Mrs. Sullivan, I don't want to give you false hope, but some of the items we've found suggest recent activity, very recent. What the investigators had discovered behind the wardrobe was far more complex than a simple hidden room. The space, roughly 6 feet by 8 feet, had been carefully constructed to be invisible from the bedroom. But it was only the beginning of an elaborate network of passages and chambers built into the very structure of the house. The passages, which investigators would later determine had been constructed in the 1940s by Robert's grandfather during World War II, appeared to have been designed as a hiding place during uncertain times. But someone had modified and expanded them over the decades, creating a secret living space that existed parallel to the normal house. "It's like a house within a house," Martinez explained to her supervisor the next morning. "Someone put a lot of time and effort into making this habitable. There's ventilation, electrical connections, even plumbing access." More disturbing were the signs of long-term habitation. The investigators found makeshift beds, stockpiles of canned food, books, clothing, and personal items spanning multiple decades. Some items appeared to date from the 1990s, while others were clearly more recent. Most shocking of all were the observations posts, carefully concealed openings that allowed someone in the hidden passages to watch the normal activities of the house. There were viewing ports into the kitchen, the living room, the parents' bedroom, and of course the twins' bedroom. "Someone has been living in this house, watching this family for decades," Agent Chen reported to her supervisors. "They've had access to every private moment, every conversation, every aspect of the Sullivans' lives." The implications were staggering. If someone had been secretly living in the house in 1993, they would have known the family's routines, known when the parents went to bed, known exactly how to access the twins' bedroom without being detected. But the investigation raised more questions than it answered. Who had built this elaborate hiding place? How long had someone been living there? Most importantly, where were Emma and Grace Sullivan? The crime scene team worked around the clock, documenting every inch of the hidden spaces. They found evidence of multiple occupants over the years, different handwriting in various notebooks, clothing in different sizes, personal items that suggested both male and female inhabitants. One notebook, discovered in what appeared to be the main living area of the hidden space, contained detailed observations about the Sullivan family's daily life, spanning several years in the early 1990s. The entries, written in careful cursive handwriting, recorded mealtimes, television viewing habits, visitor schedules, and intimate family conversations. October 10th, 1993, read one entry. "The twins practiced their Halloween costumes after dinner. Emma wants to add glitter to her hat. Grace is worried about being scary. They whispered about it for 20 minutes after lights out." The entry was dated just 5 days before the twins disappeared. Other notebooks contained what appeared to be lesson plans and educational materials. Mathematics worksheets, reading comprehension exercises, science experiments, all written at a level appropriate for elementary school children. Someone was teaching them, Agent Chen realized as she reviewed the materials. Whoever took them was continuing their education. The discovery of the hidden spaces transformed the investigation from a cold case into an active manhunt. If the twins had been taken by someone living secretly in their house, and if that person had been using these spaces for 31 years, there was a possibility, however remote, that they might still be alive. But the passages were empty now. Whoever had been living there had apparently abandoned the space recently. The most recent food items had expiration dates in early 2024, and several personal belongings appeared to have been hastily removed. "They know we're here," Detective Morrison told his team. "Whoever was living in these passages, they cleared out just before we arrived." The investigation expanded to include surveillance of the area around the Sullivan house, analysis of utility records to track unusual usage patterns, and interviews with neighbors about any strange sounds or sightings over the past several months. Margaret and Robert were relocated to a hotel while the investigation continued. They could not bear to stay in a house where someone had been secretly watching them for decades, but they also couldn't bear to leave while there was still hope of finding their daughters. 31 years, Margaret said, as she sat in the unfamiliar hotel room, staring out the window toward their house where crime scene lights blazed through the night. "Someone was living in our house for 31 years and we never knew." The violation felt almost as devastating as the original disappearance. Every private moment, every grief-stricken conversation, every anniversary of loss, someone had been watching, listening, recording their pain. But more than that, the discovery raised the possibility that Emma and Grace might be alive. After 3 decades of believing her daughters were dead, Margaret hardly dared to hope that they might still exist somewhere, perhaps as adults who had been held captive and raised in secret. "If they're alive," she whispered to Robert as they lay in the hotel bed, unable to sleep. "They're 38 years old now. They might have children of their own." "If they're alive," Robert replied, "we'll find them. We'll bring them home." As the investigation entered its second week, the hidden passages gave up more secrets. Investigators found a complex ventilation system that explained how someone could live in the walls without suffocating. They discovered electrical connections that had been tapping into the house's power supply for decades. Most importantly, they found evidence that the passages extended beyond the Sullivan house, connecting to abandoned buildings and storm drains that provided multiple escape routes. "This isn't the work of one person," Agent Chen concluded. "Someone planned this for years, maybe decades. They had help, resources, expertise." The FBI expanded their investigation to include a search for any other houses in the area that might contain similar hidden spaces. They reviewed construction records for the entire neighborhood, looking for properties that had been owned or modified by the same contractors who might have built the passages. What they discovered would shock the entire community and finally reveal the truth about what happened to Emma and Grace Sullivan on that October night in 1993. But first, they had to find the people who had been living in the shadows for 31 years, and who might still have the answers Margaret and Robert had been seeking for more than half their lives. The search was about to lead them to a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about the case, about their community, and about the nature of love and loss itself. Because somewhere in the darkness, the closet that had been found breathing was about to give up its final secret. The breakthrough came on March 28, 2024, exactly 2 weeks after the discovery of the hidden passages. Detective Morrison was reviewing construction records from the 1940s when he noticed something that had been overlooked. The Sullivan house wasn't the only property in Millbrook with mysterious architectural modifications. Between 1942 and 1945, during World War II, 7 houses in the area had been modified by the same contractor. Heinrich Zimmermann, a German immigrant who had lived in Millbrook since 1923. Zimmermann's construction company had specialized in what the records vaguely described as security enhancements and emergency shelters. He was building safe houses, Agent Chen realized as she studied the patterns. Places for people to hide during wartime, but Zimmermann had died in 1963 and his construction company had closed shortly after. So who had been maintaining and using these hidden spaces for the past 60 years? The answer came from an unexpected source: Eleanor Zimmerman Walsh, Heinrich's 97-year-old granddaughter, who lived in a nursing home in nearby Lancaster. When investigators contacted her about her grandfather's work, she broke down and confessed to a secret that had haunted her family for 8 decades. "My grandfather wasn't just building hiding places," Eleanor told Detective Morrison during their interview. "He was part of an underground network that helped people disappear, people who needed to start new lives, escape dangerous situations, or protect children from harm." Eleanor's revelation opened a new chapter in the investigation. Heinrich Zimmerman had been involved in what was essentially a witness protection program decades before such things became official government policy. His hidden rooms and secret passages had sheltered abuse victims, people fleeing dangerous relationships, and families trying to escape persecution. "After the war ended, the network didn't stop," Eleanor continued. "My father, Heinrich's son, took over the operations. Then my brother took over after that. It became a family responsibility." "Is your brother still alive?" Agent Chen asked. Eleanor's face crumpled with grief and shame. "Frederick died in 2018, but before he died, he told me something that I should have reported years ago. He said there were children in the network, children who had been rescued from terrible situations and were being raised in secret." "Emma and Grace Sullivan?" "I don't know their names," Eleanor whispered. "Frederick never told me specifics. He said it was safer that way, but he said there were twins, 7-year-old twins who came into the network in the 1990s. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with terrifying clarity. The Sullivan twins hadn't been kidnapped by a stranger. They had been rescued by someone who believed they were saving them from some perceived danger. But who had made that decision, and why? The answer came from the most unlikely source imaginable: Margaret's own sister, Jennifer, who had flown in from California to support the family during the renewed investigation. When Detective Morrison showed Jennifer the photographs of the hidden passages and the evidence found inside, she went pale and asked to speak privately with investigators. "I need to tell you something," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I should have told you 31 years ago." Jennifer's confession would shatter everything the Sullivan family thought they knew about their lives. "In 1993, I was going through a very difficult divorce," Jennifer began. "My husband was abusive, violent. I was terrified for my life. I had contacted an organization that helped women escape dangerous situations." She paused, struggling with the weight of her secret. "The organization told me they could help me disappear completely. New identity, new life, protection for me and any children, but I was too scared to go through with it. I backed out at the last minute." "What does this have to do with Emma and Grace?" Agent Chen asked. "I told them about Margaret's family during one of our conversations. I was so envious of her perfect life, her beautiful children, her safe marriage. I might have given the impression that Margaret and Robert weren't good parents." Jennifer broke down completely. "I was angry and jealous and scared. I said things I didn't mean. I suggested that the twins would be better off away from what I called a dysfunctional situation. I was talking about my own life, but they might have thought I was talking about Margaret's." The implications were staggering. An underground network designed to protect children from abuse had targeted the Sullivan twins based on a bitter sister's misrepresentation of their family situation. "Who did you talk to?" Detective Morrison pressed. "Who was your contact with this organization?" "A woman named Catherine. She said she had been rescued by the network herself as a child and now dedicated her life to helping others. She was very convincing, very passionate about protecting children." Armed with this new information, investigators focused their search on finding Catherine and determining how many other children might have been rescued by the network over the decades. The search led them to Catherine Morris, a 68-year-old woman who lived in a remote farmhouse 40 miles outside Millbrook. When police arrived at her property on March 30th, they found something that defied all expectations. The farmhouse wasn't just a house, it was a compound with multiple buildings connected by underground tunnels, and it wasn't empty. Inside, investigators found what could only be described as a hidden community, 17 people ranging in age from 25 to 45, all of whom claimed to have been rescued from dangerous family situations as children. Among them were two 38-year-old women who introduced themselves as Emily and Grace Morrison. But Margaret Sullivan took one look at them and knew immediately who they really were. "Emma," she whispered, reaching toward the woman who had called herself Emily. "Grace." The reunion that followed was unlike anything the investigators had ever witnessed. Margaret collapsed to her knees, sobbing as she reached for daughters who were now older than she had been when they disappeared. Robert stood frozen, unable to process that the 7-year-old girls he had lost were now grown women, with grey threads in their hair and lines around their eyes. Emma and Grace, who had spent 31 years believing their parents had abandoned them, and that Catherine Morris was their saviour, struggled to understand that everything they had been told about their childhood was a lie. "Catherine saved us," Emma insisted, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had built their entire identity around a fundamental misunderstanding. "Our parents didn't want us. They were going to hurt us." "That's not true," Margaret cried. "We loved you. We never stopped looking for you. We never gave up hope." The psychological damage of 31 years of systematic deception would take months to unravel. Catherine Morris had created an elaborate fiction to justify her actions, convincing the children in her care that they had been rescued from abusive families who had willingly given them up. But the physical evidence told a different story. The twins' bedroom had been monitored for months before their rescue. Catherine and her associates had studied the family's routines, confirmed that Margaret and Robert were loving parents, and taken the children anyway because Jennifer's misguided comments had convinced them intervention was necessary. "I thought I was saving them," Catherine insisted during her interrogation. "Jennifer told me they were in danger. I couldn't risk leaving children in a harmful situation." "No, so you destroyed a family based on second-hand information from a bitter woman going through a divorce?" Agent Chen asked. "I saved those children," Catherine repeated, even as the evidence of her crimes mounted around her. The investigation revealed that Catherine's rescue network had operated for decades, taking children they believed were in danger and raising them in secret communities. Most of the rescued children had indeed come from genuinely abusive situations, but Emma and Grace Sullivan were not the only cases where the network had acted on false or incomplete information. The children were raised in isolation, educated by Catherine and her associates, and told elaborate stories about why they couldn't return to their families. They were given new names, new identities, and new histories that painted their rescuers as heroes and their families as villains. "We thought we were orphans," Grace explained to investigators. "Catherine told us our parents had died in an accident after abandoning us. She said she found us living on the streets and took us in. The twins had lived their entire adult lives believing they were survivors of neglect and abandonment, grateful to the woman who had actually kidnapped them from loving parents. But the most heartbreaking revelation was yet to come." "Where have you been for the past month?" Detective Morrison asked Catherine. "The hidden spaces in the Sullivan house were recently abandoned." Catherine's confession revealed the final, devastating truth. "I've been sick," she admitted. "Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months left. I knew I needed to make arrangements for the children before I died." So you went back to their original house?" "I wanted Emma and Grace to see their childhood home one more time before I told them the truth." I thought if they could remember their parents, remember being loved, it might help them understand what I had done. Catherine had been living in the passages for the past 3 months, watching Margaret and Robert's daily routines, just as she had in 1993. But this time, instead of planning to take their children, she was planning to return them. I was going to leave them there, Catherine whispered. Just like I took them. I was going to put them back in their old bedroom one night and disappear, let them wake up and find their way back to their family. But Catherine's courage had failed her. She couldn't face the consequences of her actions, couldn't bear to see the pain she had caused. Instead, she had fled back to her compound, planning to take her secrets to the grave. The breathing sounds, Agent Chen realized. The neighbors who reported hearing strange noises from the Sullivan house. That was you moving around in the walls. I was trying to work up the courage to do what I should have done 31 years ago, Catherine admitted. The arrest that followed was swift but complex. Catherine Morris was charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and dozens of other crimes related to her decades of operating an illegal rescue network. Several of her associates were also arrested, though many had believed they were genuinely helping abused children. Jennifer Sullivan faced charges related to providing false information that led to the kidnapping, though prosecutors acknowledged that her actions, while reckless, had not been intentionally criminal. The reunion between Margaret, Robert, Emma, and Grace was painfully complicated. 3 decades of separation could not be bridged in a few tearful embraces. The twins had to grapple with learning that their entire adult lives had been based on lies, while their parents had to accept that their 7-year-old daughters were now grown women with their own relationships, careers, and complicated feelings about the family they barely remembered. I remember the glow-in-the-dark stars, Grace said during one of their first conversations, and the fairy tale lamp. I used to dream about them, but Catherine told me they were just fantasies. I saved all your things, Margaret said through tears. Everything is exactly the way you left it. The psychological healing would take years. Emma and Grace had to learn to trust that their parents really had loved them and searched for them. Margaret and Robert had to accept that their daughters were strangers who needed time and space to process their trauma. But slowly, carefully, the family began to rebuild. Emma, who had become a teacher at Catherine's compound, discovered that she had inherited her mother's gift for working with children. Grace, who had spent her adult years caring for the other rescued children, found that she shared her father's practical, nurturing nature. The twins decided to keep their childhood bedroom as it was for a while longer, not as a shrine to loss, but as a bridge between the children they had been and the women they had become. Sometimes I sit in there and try to remember, Emma told a therapist 6 months after their reunion. I try to remember being 7 and feeling safe and loved. Catherine took that from me, but I'm starting to find it again. Grace struggled more with anger and confusion. I wasted 31 years being grateful to the woman who destroyed my family, she said. How do I forgive myself for that? The answer came slowly, through therapy, through time, and through the unwavering love of parents who had never stopped believing their daughters would come home. Catherine Morris died in prison 8 months after her arrest, taking many secrets about the underground network with her. The investigation into her activities led to the discovery of dozens of other cases where children had been taken from families based on incomplete or false information. But it also revealed genuine cases where the network had saved children from horrific abuse, creating a complex moral landscape that would challenge prosecutors and social workers for years to come. The Sullivan case became a landmark study in the dangers of vigilante justice, even when motivated by good intentions. It highlighted the need for proper oversight of child protection services and the devastating consequences that could result from acting on incomplete information. For Margaret and Robert, now in their 70s, The return of their daughters was both a miracle and a challenge. They had to learn to be parents to adult children who had their own lives, their own relationships, and their own ways of seeing the world. "We lost 31 years, Robert said during a family therapy session. "We can't get those back, but we can build something new with the time we have left." Emma and Grace slowly began to integrate their recovered memories with their adult lives. They learned about the massive search efforts that had consumed their community. They read newspaper articles about their disappearance and discovered that hundreds of people had dedicated thousands of hours to looking for them. "All those people cared about us," Grace marveled. "All those strangers who helped search for us." The twins decided to stay in Pennsylvania, moving into apartments near their parents while they worked to rebuild their relationships. They attended support groups for kidnapping survivors and family reunification. They slowly began to form relationships with extended family members who had never stopped loving them. Most importantly, they began to understand that they had been genuinely loved as children, that their disappearance had devastated their family, and that Catherine Morris's rescue had been a profound violation rather than an act of salvation. The old oak wardrobe, where their story had begun, was eventually moved to the basement, its secret passages sealed and its hiding places filled in. But the twins kept some of their childhood clothes and toys, tangible connections to the 7-year-olds they had been. "We're not the same people we would have been if we had grown up here," Emma acknowledged. "But we're still us. We're still the children who used to hide in that closet and whisper secrets. And we're still the daughters who were loved enough that our parents never gave up looking for us," Grace added. On October 15th, 2024, exactly 31 years after the twins disappeared, the Sullivan family held a private ceremony in the backyard of the house on Maple Street. They planted 2 oak trees, one for Emma and one for Grace, symbolizing new growth from deep roots. Margaret, now 73, stood between her daughters and marveled at the impossible reality of their presence. "I used to dream about this," she said. "But in my dreams, you were still 7 years old. I never imagined I would get to know you as the amazing women you became." "We're still becoming," Emma replied, taking her mother's hand. "And we're doing it together," Grace added, completing the thought the way she had when they were children. The Sullivan twins had finally come home, not as the children who had vanished in 1993, but as adults ready to build new relationships with the family that had never stopped loving them. The closet that had breathed with secrets for 31 years was finally silent, but the house on Maple Street was alive again with the sound of voices that Margaret and Robert had never expected to hear, telling stories they had never expected to learn, and building a future none of them could have imagined. The nightmare that began on October 15th, 1993, was finally over. But the real story, the story of healing, forgiveness, and the reconstruction of a family torn apart by well-intentioned evil, was just beginning. In the end, Emma and Grace Sullivan had not just survived their ordeal. They had returned home with the strength and wisdom of women who had overcome the unthinkable, ready to help their parents heal from 3 decades of loss while learning to heal themselves. The mystery of the vanishing twins was solved, but the miracle of their return would continue to unfold for the rest of their lives.